This is Simone.
And this is Katinka.
And you are listening to the Novotech podcast. We live in a time when technology is changing faster than ever before and transforming the way we live and interact with the world. The question is, how do we keep up?
In this podcast, we'll interview real people and certainly hear their tips on how to learn, adapt, and succeed in this ever-changing world of technology. Are you ready?
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Our guest today is Tyler Evans, the manager of the Cards Fraud Analytics Group at Anzac in Melbourne, Australia. Previously, Tyler worked at Latitude Financial Services as the manager of fraud risk, has been an analyst at National Bank Australia, and he also has a PhD in the field of astrophysics from Swinburne University of Technology. Hi, Tyler. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Please tell us about your journey. What do you do in your current role and how did you end up there?
That's really a long journey to tell. It's very much two different questions. So in terms of how I ended up here, it's been a bit of a saga. I started off and really, as long as I can remember, as far back as I can remember, I've been interested in astronomy. When I was young, I would oftentimes get asked by teachers, family members, parents, aunts, uncles, whatever. They'd say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I'd say, "I want to be an astronomer." And they'd look at me and go, "Oh, that's great. You want to be an astronaut?" And I'd say, No, I don't really want to go to space. I want to study space." And so I think really, as I said, about as far back as I can remember, it's been something that's really been a passion for me. And I think that speaks to a lot of people. It's very common throughout the world, regardless of your culture or your background or your race or what you believe in. It's easy to look up at the stars and wonder. And that's what drove me into astronomy or astrophysics. So after that, I went to elementary school, middle school, high school, and university, and it was sort of always in the back of my mind. There were other things that played around, but I found that I really liked the challenge for physics. And so naturally what comes to me is much more around people, actually. So I'm really fascinated by how people work and how they interact. And I love things like mythology and sort of the history of people from a stories point of view. But what kept drawing me back to astronomy and physics was the challenge of it. I love the challenge of it. And so as I went through my schooling, I kept that in mind. And I think in the US, you really don't have to decide what it is you want to do with your career until you're a bit further along. So one thing I've noticed being in Australia is you decide usually in high school what it is you want to do when you go forward. In the US, you actually have a couple years of university studying a few different things before you decide. And I'm really, really grateful for that because I got to study things like religion, culture, history, anthropology, that sort of thing. But all that aside, when I came to Australia, to study astrophysics. And a big part of that, and a big part of doing a PhD, is working on a project that interests you with a person that you think will be able to support you and help you grow. And I found that here. And as you mentioned, I did do my PhD at Swinburne. And a huge thanks to Michael Murphy, who's still a professor there, still works at Swinburne, as I think I was his third student, maybe. And he really took me under his wing, and he was exactly what I needed. He's a great combination of very strict and has very high standards, but also willing to dedicate himself to helping people grow. And that, I think, is a brilliant combination of people. And that's really helped me grow into the kind of person that I am as a manager these days within the cards analytics space or the fraud space. So I came over to Australia. I worked on my PhD for 4 years, and I loved it. I love research. I love astrophysics, and I love sort of the people that I met. And it was a really, really good experience. All that being said, obviously, I'm not still an academician. I'm not still an astrophysicist. So what happened? And a big part of it, of what happened for me, is that academia in a lot of ways is not currently a field that is welcoming. It's not a field that has a lot of growth opportunity. So at every stage between high school and university, you cut out a bunch of people that are interested in science, that are interested in understanding how the world works. Between university and postgrad, again, you cut out a bunch of people who would love to do work, but there aren't enough positions, there aren't enough research opportunities for them. And then I would say possibly at each stage, it's more and more strict. So for me, this was the hardest cut, was between university and postgrad. And you go from a ton of people who love the subject, would be willing to do whatever it takes, to a tenth of them. And there just aren't enough positions for them all. And then you get through that. And this is the point that I got to. You get through all that. You say, yes, I love astronomy. I love research. I love the people I'm working with, but I want a job in Australia. And all of a sudden, you're competing against hundreds of people for 3-4 jobs. So it's very, very difficult to say that you want to be able to control both your career and your family life and stay in academia, at least in astronomy. So that stage in my life, I had met the woman who's now my wife. And we're very, very happy. And I'm thrilled that we live in Australia. I'm thrilled that we live in Melbourne. And I'm thrilled that we're together. But I could not have stayed in Melbourne and continued a career in astronomy. And I think that's something that anyone out there who's been in a very specific field in academia can probably relate to. It's very, very challenging. So what I did was, once I completed my degree in astrophysics, I looked for ways that I could apply things that I had learned and my passion for making sense of data. And I said, how can I do this to make a difference? And as much as I love academia and as much as I love astronomy and the sort of esoterics of it in a way, like to some extent, you're answering some of the most fundamental questions in the world, which, well, the world, I should say, the universe, right? These are the questions that keep people up at night. You know, you hear you hear about Feinstein, who's, one of the greatest physicists of the time. And he, literally said, with great claims, it requires great evidence. And this is the type of work that astrophysicists do. So I respect it. I love it. I wish I could continue to contribute, but it wasn't what was right for me going forward. So I wanted to stay within Australia, preferably within Melbourne. And I wanted to feel like I was making a difference. So there was a period of time after I finished my PhD where I was applying for jobs and I was trying to figure out what the next steps were. And I applied for a lot of different things, and some of them didn't appeal to me. Some of them did, as is the nature of applying to jobs. And I think a lot of younger folks these days really can understand that. It's, yes, you have the thing you want to do, but also at the end of the day, you need a job and you need to be able to take care of yourself and you need to have food on your plate at the, when you have dinner. So among the things that I applied to was a role for fraud analytics. And that was my first outside of academia job. That was at NAB, National Australia Bank. And it was really quite funny because when I applied for that, I was like, that sounds interesting. I'll apply for it. I was contacted probably 48 hours before my interview. And I was told, oh, we're thrilled to have you. It's so wonderful that you applied. When you come in, you'll be taking a test. And I said, oh my God, I'm taking a test. I just finished 26 years of studying. I'm never taking a test again in my life. I'm dropping out of this. And my fiance, my wife now, said, look, if you hate it, get up, leave in the middle, and what harm has ever been done? It's fine. If you don't like it, just go away. But at least go. And I said, all right, that's very reasonable, I suppose. So I went and I sat down and I took the test and it was fun. And that was a big surprise to me. So the test was mostly logic puzzles and word problems. And since taking that test, I've done a fair amount of hiring myself. And what I found is less than how somebody scores on that test, the reaction to it tells significantly more. So I've interviewed people after that who've done well on that test. And they've said, it's ridiculous that you made me sit that. I'm very experienced. I can't believe you did that. And I've interviewed people who have said, oh, I wasn't expecting it. And I'm not sure I did well, but gee, was that fun? And what I've found is people with the attitude that love to solve problems are the people that are going to be good at doing fraud analytics, financial crime analytics in general, probably data science in general. It is in part about how good you are at data manipulation, but it's also about what makes you happy. Because if you're not enjoying the work you're doing, you're not going to do a good job. You're not going to want to be there. You're not going to engage with the team. So that was my first role outside of academia. I actually joined the financial crime team, and it was really exciting. It was working on big ticket issues that impacted a lot of people. So it was around money laundering and terrorism financing. And so we would, write rules to try and catch, in some extremes, literally trying to catch people that were pedophiles. It was, pay-per-view child abuse in Southeast Asia. And it's a terrible situation, and probably there's a whole podcast on that. I don't want to go into it. But the fact that you could feel like you were making a difference really appealed to me. And that's something that stuck with me the entire time that I've done fraud or financial crimes, that at the end of the day, I feel like I can point to people and say, I've made a difference in their lives. And it's super cliche, and I hate saying it, but it's really something that I believe. As I said, it sounds a bit cliche, but it really is a nice feeling to know that you're contributing to something that makes people feel better, people feel safer. So from NAB, I applied what I could learn. So, there was a lot around. I think the best way to put it, and people that understand this, I think, do really well in the field, is it's not just about processing data and getting results. It's about transforming numbers and raw data into information. And then, further than that, being able to communicate that information. It's all wonderful that you can do that and you know what it means, but what does that mean for the people around you? So that is a skill that was really, really instilled in me when I was doing my PhD at Swinburne. As I mentioned, Michael Murphy, my advisor there, he and I, several nights on Friday nights over a pint of beer, would actually discuss this. And I'd say, but what does it matter? I found this result. This is great. Who cares if anyone else knows? And he would say to me, what's the point if no one else knows? And I'd say, I found it out, so that's fine. And he would say, yeah, but we're trying to make the world a better place. We're trying to help people out. We're trying to further understanding. And that has stuck with me so much over the years, regardless of anything else I've done. It's all well and good to understand it, but to help other people understand it makes such a difference. So, as I said, I started off in a financial crime type role, looking at money laundering. And then I decided that I wanted to know more. And so as I grew and met people within the industry and met people within NAB, I decided that I wanted to, see what else there was. And so that was when I moved into fraud. And I found that with fraud, it's a bit of a balancing game. So within fraud, you're able to have that almost instant gratification of knowing how a case resolves. So you find somebody who's been impacted, you can call them, you can speak to them, you know what happens, and then you get a result. And so you know what happens. Within financial crime, sometimes you don't find out what happens for years. So you report it to industry bodies, you report it to the government, and they follow up on it. And so there's a bit of a back and forth between severity of the issue and how quickly you get to know about it. So it is a balance. But I really enjoyed learning new things. I think that's always been true of me. And I think that's very much true of a lot of people that work in data. And a lot of data scientists is they want to learn, they want to try new things, and they want to see what happens out of it. And that's one of the things that's been great about fraud for me. So after a bit of time at NAB, I then moved over to Latitude Financial Services. And that for me was a step change in what I was doing. So I went from purely an analytics role into a position where I was managing. And I can tell you now that if younger me, or rather, if older me went back in time and talked to younger me and said, hey, you're going to love managing other people, I would have just laughed him out of the room. Like, I would not have believed that when I was doing my PhD or when I was in my university days. But what I found is it's really, really satisfying to see other people do well. And so to be able to share your information and talk about what you've done and help them grow, and even when they leave the team, if they're doing something that's beneficial to them, it's really satisfying. So I've really, really enjoyed my time as a manager of other people. Still in the fraud space, and I still like to delve down into the code. And anyone that's worked with me knows that, when something comes up, it's not up to them to solve it, it's up to us to solve it. And, there are days where we're there late. We'll be Friday afternoon, we've detected something new, and we'll stay there till it's solved. And sometimes it sucks, yes, but I'll be there next to you and I'll be coding with you because that's what my roots are. That's where I started from. And I still get a kick out of it. So if I can, I would like to still be able to contribute to the day-to-day stuff. But at the end of the day, my job is to make sure that people feel happy and secure and make the workplace as productive and enjoyable as it can be, because that's really when people thrive. So from Latitude, I recently moved across to ANZ, and it's been a really good move for me. I'm very grateful for all the opportunities that I had at Latitude. But one of the advantages to a Big Four institution, so ANZ is one of the Big Four banks within Australia. If you think about how the financial structure is built, it's across 4 pillars, and ANZ is one of those pillars. The advantage to that is that there's a lot more industry interaction. So I've been able to get involved in industry bodies and make decisions that impact what fraud will look like and the impact of customers going forward. So I've been there since August, which is, I guess, about 4 or 5 months now. And it's been great. So the team has been welcoming. It's been very, very strange to join during COVID, where I feel like I know the team. I feel like I get along with them all, but we've never actually met in person. So it's a weird experience, but it's not one that I would trade in for anything. So I'm thrilled to be a part of the fraud team at ANZ. I have wonderful support from my manager and my manager's manager, and fraud is really well regarded, and our teams are really well respected here, which is great. So it means that we're able to try and help people. At the end of the day, that's what we're doing. So we want to pick up as much fraud while impacting as few customers as possible. So in short, because you asked a 15-word question and I've been talking for 15 minutes, that's how I got to where I am.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing your story. I think this was really a great summary of, both the attractive side, but also the challenges faced in academia. And I also just wanted to mention that I fully agree with you that you really have to enjoy that problem-solving aspect of the job if you want to become, or if you want to be successful in the field of analytics. And I definitely want to come back to many of the topics that you touched upon. But let me just come back to your career in academia first and this change. So what were the main challenges for you when you decided you wanted to change careers? So would you say what you do today is vastly different from your role as an academic?
It's pretty different. So there's some fundamental similarities. And those are really what I was talking about around converting data, numbers, raw information into insights. And that's what anyone in analytics or data science does. So that aspect of it is the same. The specifics of what I'm doing is quite different. So within the world of fraud, things are actually very, very fast paced. So when I was doing my PhD, I worked on about 3 projects over 4 years. It was fabulous. I'd come in and I'd work on it and I'd chug away and make a difference. And then I'd go home and then I would have dinner, and then I'd probably work on it at night after I'd had dinner. But still, you're working on the same project over time. Whereas my priorities within fraud change every day, if not every hour. So it's very different in terms of pace. The specifics of it are quite different. So I had to learn new coding languages. That being said, once you know how to code, you can pick up another language. That's not really an issue. The biggest changes, I think, would probably be around how to break into a new field. So there's a lot of challenge around when you apply for a job, one of the things that they look for is you have experience in the job. It's your classic catch-22. So you want the job, great. How long have you done the job? Well, I haven't because I'm trying to get into it. So it's 100%. I think this is true across every single industry anywhere. Like you need experience before you can get the job. And so I was in a really fortunate position where somebody took a risk on me. And that's something that I try to pass along to people when I hire these days. To me, it's less important that you've been in fraud analytics for 5 years than that you know how to think about things, that you know how to interpret data, and what can you bring to the team in terms of culture. So I do try to be mindful of that, but I would say that is absolutely one of the biggest challenges stepping out of academia into the rest of the world is people are oftentimes impressed by a PhD, that doesn't mean you're going to get a job. People want people that have worked in their position before. And I think that the best way that we can buck that system is by getting more of us who have done different things into positions and into positions that can hire. Because I know it and the both of you know it. Like, we're smart. That's what we do. We solve problems. And it doesn't actually matter where that problem comes from. It's that passion for solving problems and the ability to do it that is more important than what I've done for the last 2 years.
Just going one point back, when you mentioned, that at the end of the day, you had to find a job to pay the bills, basically, right?
Yeah.
So is that right to assume that whatever you have in academia is not well paid enough?
I would actually probably disagree with that point a bit. I think that if you can get a job in academia, and if it's what you love, then it's the right thing to do. I think that I'm currently in a field that pays better than academia, but there are fields that pay worse. I think you need to do what's right for you. And that's a bit of a cop-out answer, and I'm aware, so I apologize. But I know people in academia. I know a lot of people in academia. I'm still in touch with a lot of my friends who did PhDs with me, and half of them have stayed in academia probably. And they really enjoy it. And they're paid enough to survive, and it's absolutely not a minimum wage job. I think if you're doing what you want and you're happy and you're getting enough to put food on your table, then do it. That being said, you're never going to make top dollar in academia, but who knows? You may discover the next big thing. And to me, that's probably worth more than making a lot of money. So there are reasons to get out of academia and there are reasons to stay into it. I would say unless salary is your particular motivator, then that should not be the decider as to whether or not you're in academia or in private industry.
Yeah, great answer. Because at the end of the day, it's all about our priorities. So each person might have a different priority. Therefore, their opportunity they'll be looking for, etc., might be different as well. But I wanted to ask that question because this is a very common topic in some of my conversations and people who came from academia. That it's not that bad. I loved what I was doing, and so all these conversations ended up being, they don't pay well enough. But again, depends on the person, depends on their journey and what they want. So thanks.
Working in an industry where we pay pretty well, so finance is oftentimes made fun of for being paid well. Like it's sort of the butt of the joke sometimes. I can tell you right now, I've met very few people who at the end of the day are happy with what they're being paid. Everyone wants to be paid a bit more. Everyone thinks that there's a different job that will pay them more. Don't search for what's going to pay you the most. Search for where you're happy, working with people that have a similar mindset, doing what you like to do. Because even within fraud analytics, you hear people say, within financial crime, they pay more. And then you go to financial crime and they say, technically we're in the operations space. And if we were in risk, we'd get paid more. And then you go to the risk space and they say, it's the product people that really get paid a lot. And so there's always going to be people that get paid more than you out there. And if that's what you're chasing, I find it really hard to believe that you're going to be satisfied at the end of the day. And my advice is don't go for that. Like, there's so many things that can make you happy in life. And having enough money is definitely one of them. But the difference between having enough money and being overwhelmingly wealthy is huge. Like, yes, you want to be able to have dinner, and you want to be able to afford gifts for your children and friends, and you want to be able to take a holiday now and then, but you don't need to have 3 yachts.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's at the end of the day, find what you love, do what you love because you're going to do well. And in one way or another, you're going to be recognized for that. So do what you love and love what you do. Well, as we are in this topic of the transition between academia to non-academia, do you have some particular advice for people who are coming from academic background and they are trying to land a job in tech, particularly in your field? What skills do you need, thinking in both terms, technical and soft skills?
That's a great question. And that's something that I try to guide people on a regular basis, whether they're coming from data science or they're coming from operations or it's their first time applying for a job. Like it's absolutely worth understanding what's important. And it's a mix of things, as are all things. But I would say that the most fundamental thing that you need to be is excited and interested in the work that you're going to be doing. If somebody interviews you and you're able to convey that this is something that you want to do because of the topic, because of the people, then you are significantly more likely to get the job than if it's just because it's going to pay the bills, as we were just talking about. So within fraud specifically, there are sort of three things that I look for when I'm talking to new hires, talking to people that are interested in joining. One of those is the passion and enthusiasm about the work. And that carries a lot of weight for me. And that's different from manager to manager. For me, that carries a lot of weight. The other two are probably more around the hard skills. So for me, if you wanted to get into fraud analytics, you'd either need to know something about fraud or something about analytics, which is not surprising, but you'd be surprised at the number of people that try and make both those jumps at the same time. So if you have a background in analyzing data, understanding what data mean, then you can learn about fraud. When I first started, I had been coding, I'd been doing astrophysics. I didn't know the first thing about fraud, but I thought it sounded cool. And I knew how to process data. I knew how to make numbers tell a story. The opposite side of that is you're very familiar with fraud. So you've worked in a call center, you've worked with fraud before, you know what fraud looks like, but you don't have the same experience coding. You don't have the same experience pulling insights from data. But that can be overcome too. So when I first started, I didn't have any SQL or SAS, which are the two main sort of coding languages that we use in finance. That being said, I did have other analytical background stuff. And so it's skills that you can pick up. So if you have a background, a passion in fraud, or you have a background and a passion in whatever it is that you're applying for, there are technical skills that you can pick up. And that's something that's very, very teachable. What's not teachable is that enthusiasm and passion. So that first point that I mentioned, that's not something you can teach. That's not something you can learn. That's something that people feel when they work on a topic that is in line with their views and their passions. So to answer your question, in my field, it's about inquisitiveness, being able to learn, being able to handle multiple priorities at the same time. It's very, very fast-paced. As I said, we'll get things that come in that throw everything off kilter. Make a plan for the week. By Wednesday, that plan is thrown off. Which isn't to say that you don't then still have to do the things that were planned earlier in the week. It just means that there are other priorities now. So being able to stay on your feet, do things quickly, are all very, very important. Being able to communicate the results that you find to your stakeholders is really important. So that's great. You found a new rule, or that's great. You found what fraud looks like. But how do we then tell the customers? How do we tell the people that call in what's happening? How do you explain that to somebody who's going through possibly one of the more difficult moments of their life in recent history? How do you explain that to the business, which is a completely different conversation? How do you tell management what happened when a new syndicate, a new group of fraudsters came in and attacked us and we lost a bunch of money? What does that mean? What happens when you block the CEO of the company's card? What happens if you decline their transaction? How do you explain that to them? And so that aspect of understanding what's happened and being able to tell people and make it a compelling argument is more important than anything else you're going to be able to find. That being said, some analytics skills help. If you can code, that helps. If you know fraud, that helps. But at the end of the day, it's a unique set of skills that people develop over time.
So I would really love to dive a bit deeper and dissect the topic of fraud detection a bit more. So could you tell us a little bit more about what is it? What are the main types of fraud? What are the main challenges in the banking sector or otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll preface this with these are my opinions and not those of ANZ, at which I currently work. But fraud is a very fast-paced environment. So things are always changing. And it's one of the things that really draws me to it. So I mentioned earlier, I'm managing a team of fraud analysts, specifically around the card space at the moment. So within my team, there's 4 or 5 of us, plus me. And the interesting thing about fraud is that there is literally a counterpart to our team on the criminal side. So there's a group of people that come in and work a 9 to 5, and they try and figure out how to get around us. So it's almost a game of chess. They do something, we do something. They do something, we do something. And it's a back and forth. And we're always trying to get ahead of each other. We'd rather be proactive than reactive, but it's always a back and forth. And that's not always the case. Sometimes we have to be reactive because they get ahead of us. And sometimes we're proactive and they have to respond to us. So within fraud, and I can talk about a wide range of it, but within fraud, it really breaks down into the transactional space, the application space, and then actually scams as well. So within the transactional space, there's a lot of different venues for what transactional fraud looks like. That can be through internet banking, or you pick up somebody's card off the sidewalk, or somebody skims your card when you're buying groceries. So there's a lot of ways that this kind of compromise can happen. And effectively what that is that somebody has stolen your information and then tried to replicate it in order to spend as you, even though it's not you. And from that side of things, I would say in general, we're seeing improvement across the industry. So there's less of that happening than there was 5 years ago. From the application point of view, there's a couple different types of fraud that you might see. So application fraud is a type of fraud where somebody is trying to get a line of credit. So that might be a personal loan, a credit card loan, a motor loan, a home loan, and something in that is deceitful. So there's a couple different ways that can come through. The first of which is that a customer is misrepresenting themselves. So they're trying to get more money than is recommended by the credit strategies. So they might say that they make more money than they actually do, or they don't have as many costs in their lives as they actually do. And the purpose of that is they need more money for whatever that purpose is, whether it's buying a new car, or they want to get a loan for their house. So they oversell themselves, which is a tempting thing to do. But the reason that we really want to be mindful of it is if something goes wrong, then they won't be able to afford that loan. And it puts them into a really difficult position. So at the end of the day, we don't want them to be stuck in a position where they can't afford it. So from that sort of first party, they've lied. That's what fraud might look like. The other side of application fraud is much more insidious as far as I'm concerned. And that's where somebody has looked you up, stolen your details, found out about you, and is actually applying for something, a credit card or personal loan maybe, and they're doing so as if they were you. And they have no intention of repaying. They're just going to disappear off the face of the planet. And when a financial institution tries to chase them up about it, they're going to go to the wrong person. And that's a horrible experience. Nobody wants to go through that saying, oh, sorry, you can't get a loan now because somebody has taken one out in your name. And so there's a huge amount of work to make sure that when we do discover that, customers aren't impacted. We want to make sure that they can still take out lending. We want to make sure that they're still able to buy a house. But it's a huge cost to the business. You send out a card to somebody who's not actually who they say they are, and they spend the whole thing and then disappear. So those are the two types of application fraud. I've discussed the sort of transactional fraud type of things. And then what we're really seeing emerging at the moment is scams. And scams have traditionally not been focused on nearly as much as fraud types. So when I say scams, what I'm talking about is somebody has convinced the customer or whoever's transacting to make or send money. So to make a transaction, send money to somebody else, and the customer believes what they are doing is genuine. So there's a variety of different scams. There's your sort of classic Nigerian prince. So send us your credit card details and you'll get your inheritance. That one's a bit outdated these days. Everyone's sort of heard about that one. But there are other ones. And the thing about scams is they typically target people who are in more vulnerable situations. So you actually see people who may be older or widowed or have had mental challenges throughout their life being targeted by things like romance scams, where all of a sudden somebody is very, very interested in them for who they are. And it's a bit funny, but the customer experience you get in one of these is pretty great. So, it's somebody who will sit there and they'll talk to you and they care about, what you've been through, and they're listening to you, and they're telling you that they understand, and then they ask you to send them money so that they can come visit you. And in some ways that sounds like a dream come true for some people, but you send them the money and that money disappears. And the challenge with scams versus fraud is that the customer has initiated this of their own free will. And so we can have a conversation with customers and we can say, hey, this person is taking advantage of you. But when that's the first person that's paid you attention in 5 years, that's so hard to hear. And so that's on the rise at the moment, and it's terrible. And especially with the environment we're living in now with COVID, a lot of people have lost their jobs. And so there's all of a sudden there's get rich quick schemes or investments that are going to return your initial investment tenfold. And it sounds good. And oftentimes if it sounds too good to be true, it's too good to be true. And so that's a huge challenge for the industry at the moment. So yes, you have your traditional fraud types, you have your skimmed cards, you have your dropped cards, you have somebody finding out what your mother's maiden name was and logging into your bank account. But actually targeting vulnerable customers is one of the biggest challenges that we're dealing with at the moment.
Yeah, what you mentioned there, of course, we can see increasing over the last few years, both frauds and scams. And one thing for me on experience is that the online onboarding, when you get to a new company, the time for those trainings exactly about this had increased a lot, I would say, at least double.
Yeah.
And that only proves that, of course, the scams and etc. have been sophisticated in many, many ways. So, of course, I believe that it's, like you said, comparing your team to the financial crimes that, playing chess and being ahead. But of course, you have to think about it and be in the mindset of those people that will be actually, creating those scams and identities. And myself, I have been receiving some phone calls and the smartphone shows potential fraud.
Yep.
So I don't even pick up. And sometimes they leave the message in my message box and say either, as if they would be ATO or whatever from the government. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, okay, what if the person is not tech savvy?
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially with the ATO ones, those happen every single year where it's, you still owe money. We need you to go to Woolworths and buy iTunes gift cards. I can tell you right now, the ATO does not care about Woolworth gift cards. Like, do not do that. But it's scary. You get a call and they're intimidating. It can be scary.
Are there certain times of the year when you can expect fraud and scams to increase, like Christmas, or is it just random that it's happening now?
No, it is quite seasonal, actually. So we always expect it around Christmas. And it's quite interesting. We sort of joke about it because the time after Christmas is quite relaxed. And so there's sort of this view that all of the fraudsters have made their money and they've gone on holidays for the year. So we do actually have a period of a bit calmer. But anytime there's a big sale going on, so we see, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, end of financial year sales, there's always a lot of fraud activity. There's a lot of scam activity around that.
This is the end of part 1, but part 2 is already available, so check it out for a continuation of the conversation with Tyler. Thanks for listening. See you in part 2.